Rabbit Run by Loyal Crowlist. Chapter 3 Trust. The rabbit was scared. It had run as far as it could, moving by instinct, by some distant and half forgotten memory until its legs had given out. When it curled up beneath the bush, there had been no thought, only exhaustion. It had heard the dogs barking and the steps of someone approaching, and had done what rabbits do: stay still, don't move an inch. Even when the pigman had picked it up, the rabbit hadn't moved. It didn't move as he carried it. Dogs that would surely rip it to shreds, nipping at his heels. It had only moved when he brought it somewhere that smelled of metal and fire. The rabbit knew what those smells meant: pain, never ending. And it knew it had to get away, but there was no strength in its kicks, and when the pigman spoke, the words were soft as were his touches. A memory pricked somewhere in the back of the rabbit's mind. People weren't to be trusted. People would hunt, catch, and maim if they could. It knew that well. There were pieces of it missing now, and people had been the ones to cut those pieces away. But the cabin was warm. I haven't betrayed you, the rabbit thought, and didn't know why. It let the man clean it up, if only because it had no energy to do anything else. And the bedding it lay on was soft, so maybe it would be all right if it rested for a moment. Not long, just enough to gather its strength to be able to run again if needed. The rabbit closed its eyes. Chapter 4 An Important Guest. Techno had remembered his hat this time. The floppy straw brim kept the sun out of his eyes as he trekked across the frozen ground. If he had built the farm like he meant to, he wouldn't have to travel so far to get vegetables other than what was on hand. Each time he told himself he would get to it, and each time something would come up that prevented him from doing so. A seemingly never-ending cycle. He sighed and wiped a bead of sweat away. His breath came out in white puffs, and the trip had been long enough to make the muscles in his legs ache slightly. The idea that he really was a sucker crossed his mind, and the voices latched on to it, repeating it over and over. Yeah, he said as he crested the hill. Ahead were the cabins, just as he had left them, but from this distance he could see the familiar figure of Phil leaning on the porch railing. Techno picked up his pace, and when he was close enough, he waved. "Hello." Phil straightened. "Hi, mate," he said. "Was wondering where you went off to. I've been spending too much damn time working on that underground bunker, and was afraid I'd lost track of time." "You losing track of time? Never," said Techno as he climbed the steps. He gave Phil a light nudge with his elbow. "I was out getting some supplies, extremely important stuff." Raising an eyebrow, Phil looked at the basket Techno was holding, one that he didn't recognize, and then looked back up at Techno. "Carrots?" "Extremely important, Phil," Techno repeated, putting emphasis on each word, and pulled open the door to the cabin. "All right, I'm telling you." Phil's laughter followed him into the cabin. "I thought you hated carrots," he asked as he pulled off his coat and hung it on the hook next to the door. His hat was next, and he ran a hand through his blonde hair. "Or am I mistaken?" "Not gonna lie, Phil, I'm not the biggest fan, but these aren't for me." That answer made Phil stop, poised above the chair he had been about to sit in, surprise on his face. It wasn't exactly like Techno to gather supplies for someone else, and absolutely nothing like him to let someone into his home without a lot of very overwrought and loud complaining. "Who the fuck are they for, then?" "Look, Phil, I know what you're gonna say, all right?" he said, moving to the kitchen, Phil following behind at a distance. The wood-burning stove was still on, and the basket where the rabbit slept was still on the table. "But what was I gonna do? Just leave it?" Phil pinched the bridge of his nose. Jesus. His shoulders sagged slightly in resignation, and he shook his head. "You brought home another damn animal, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Phil already knew, and there was a fondness in the words. "Okay, listen. It was hurt and suffering. I had to do something, Phil. I mean, just look at it." Gesturing to the basket, Techno took a step back so that Phil could get a look. The shorter man leaned over the table and gave a low whistle. That thing's alive? He asked. It looks fucking dead. What the hell happened to it? No idea, Techno shrugged helplessly and turned to the sink to begin washing the carrots. At first, I thought maybe a dog or a fox got a hold of it, but some of those cuts are too dang clean to be animal bites. You think someone did this on purpose? I mean, I really don't like thinking about those implications, but I can't think of another explanation, said Techno, picking up a knife. All the knives in the cabin were kept razor sharp. It cut through the carrots like silk and hit the wood board below with a thud. Sadistic fuckers, said Phil, leaning down to take a closer look. The rabbit opened its eyes, pupils so wide that only black was visible. It kicked its hind legs, a sad attempt to stand, but only succeeded in pushing itself partly out of the basket. Whoa there. Techno turned back to the table, and Phil stepped out of his way. Easy, easy there, little buddy, he said as he carefully patted the rabbit's head and tucked it back into the basket. I'm getting you some food, all right? Just hang tight. I'm not sure it's going to eat, mate. He pointed towards the rabbit's mouth. There was a thin trickle of blood, fresh, dripping down. I think its teeth or jaw are busted or something. It looks a tad crooked. Sighing, Techno sunk down into the chair. Yeah, I was kind of afraid of that. Might be best to put it out of its misery, said Phil, tone gentle and knowing what the answer would be before he even spoke. They had been friends for so long, after all. Techno leaned back in the chair, watching the rabbit. At Phil's words, its ears had twitched and it had closed its eyes as if it was resigned to that fate, which was a ridiculous thought, as rabbits didn't speak human. He rubbed his chin. I know, he said, but I just don't got it in me to kill a helpless bunny rabbit, all right, Phil? I mean, just look at it. With a laugh, Phil gripped Techno's shoulder and gave him a light shake. He kept his hand there, leaning against him. Oh, mate. You want to grind up the food, then mix it with a little milk and feed it that way, said Phil. Just make sure that you don't choke it. Techno's cheeks went a deeper shade of pink, and he waved his hand. You know that from your child rearing days, huh? I guess a baby's close enough to a bunny, he said. You want some help with this or not? Rabbits don't speak human. That much is true. But speaking and understanding were different things, and the rabbit understood. Words were invasive, they wormed their way in, and the rabbit knew many, and knew enough to realize that most rabbits did not, and wonder why it was different. Enough to know that the pig man and the broken man with the wings would think it strange that it understood. So it's done its best not to react. Its ear had betrayed it, and the pig man had narrowed his eyes ever so slightly, and nothing else. The smell of food wafted towards the rabbit, and it became painfully aware of how hungry it was. Days had passed since it had eaten. It couldn't even remember the taste of food, and the thought of eating made its stomach recoil. If the men tried to feed it, it would be sick. There was no way it could communicate that. I could tell them, it thought, and it was a strange thought. How? How could it tell them anything when it couldn't speak? You know how. The rabbit's nose twitched. There was something in the back of its mind that was buried away deep, like a warren that had gone sour and abandoned. That was how. All it had to do was dig it up, but the rabbit was afraid. What was buried there was pain and anguish and hatred, and the rabbit was tired. A voice that sounded familiar said, You'll have to eventually, and it would. The rabbit knew that, but it wasn't the sort of thing a rabbit should know, so it tried to forget for now. Alright, so those were chapters 3 and 4 of Rabbit Run. I'm so sorry. It sounds so botched and shitty. My throat has gotten worse as it's gotten later in the evening. It's 11 at night for me right now, and it's gotten worse because my room is out on the porch. Like, it's closed porch, but it's still out on the porch, and our walls are very thin, so it doesn't help. So I had to break this up the recording part of it up into a lot more pieces than I did with the video of chapter 1 and 2. I'm so sorry, and I'm rambling. I'm also sorry for the background noise towards the end of chapter 3. That would be due to the little green bean you see on the screen right now. That's his nickname. He's still a kitten, so he's very playful, and I don't like putting them up anywhere because, for one, there's so many holes in our walls that they can fit through from where we've had to do renovations and just haven't had time to cover them back up. So they like to go through the holes in the walls to get into other rooms, and I don't like putting him in a cat carrier because it's an old cat carrier. I need to buy a new one. And he's starting to get too big for it anyways. It's a really small one. Yeah, I'm rambling. I hope you enjoyed. I'm once again so sorry that it sounds botched and for my voice.